hopping on. Make sure if you hop on, you share the video and also say hello so I know that you're here. But co-parenting is something that I love talking about because it's actually a testimonial that I can give, because I had a co-parenting relationship, or I have a co-parenting relationship that I've been able to engage in successfully for about the last 10 years. So I'll just start off telling you my oldest son. I'm a married mom. My oldest son is not the biological child of my husband. I'm co-parenting with his father. And we have a really good relationship now, but it wasn't always that way. And I wanted to talk tonight about why it's so difficult to overcome in co-parenting relationships, oftentimes the toxic energies that exist. And I think a big part of that for me, wait a minute, y'all know I don't do messy hair, so I'm going to fix my little thing. A big part of it for me was actually going through the healing process of healing myself after co-parenting. And I'll just be honest and upfront in saying that it was not an easy journey for me. I was seriously heartbroken when my son's father left me, and I did not have a positive emotional response. And oftentimes that resulted in shouting matches between the two of us. It resulted in lack of communication because there were times when we could literally we couldn't even have a phone call together. We couldn't even have a conversation. Like, there was no conversation to be had. Every conversation ended in threats and calling each other names and just all kinds of debauchery. It was never good. Even when I would go to drop my son off, we would fight and argue. And that was even once we'd agreed that, we both wanted to spend time with him, but we still could not come to common ground because of the lack of communication skills that we had. And so when I'm honest with myself about co-parenting and our co-parenting relationship that we had prior to it becoming a positive one, I can really admit that it took me a long time to overcome because I was mad. And I think that, oftentimes as co-parents, we are told to get over it. Especially as women, we are told that our feelings are not valid and that he's gone and that we need to try to make a life without him and just move on. And while that is true in the long run, when you are trying to successfully co-parent and you're still in the early days of the relationship having been severed, that is really difficult to ask someone to do. And so one of the things that I wrote down is that a big part of the healing process when you are trying to successfully co-parent and the relationship is still fresh, is just admitting to yourself that you are mad. And I see a lot of moms making decisions about co-parenting, but not under the premise of admitting that they are still upset that the relationship severed. And you also need to be able to recognize that that is a totally normal and even admirable reaction to have, because it shows that you wanted the relationship to work out, that you had high hopes and you were optimistic about, the integrity and the foundation of the relationship that you had created. Even if there wasn't a huge foundation, at least you had optimism. And I think a lot of times we're not given our props for that as women, and we're told to rush and to get over it when that's just not a realistic way of understanding. And I think from the perspective of being a woman of the African diaspora, one of the things we oftentimes take for granted is our relationships, and having the understanding that for African women, for people of the African diaspora, culture and community is centered. Like, it is the glue that binds us together. And so when there is a severing of a relationship, that is a very traumatic event that occurs. And I see a lot of moms trying to rush towards co-parenting instead of taking the time out, like I didn't do, because I didn't do this, but taking the time out to really recognize that you've been traumatized. And I remember when my son's father and I first broke up, I spent months listening to Jill Scott and Music Soul Child and crying. But that was my way of overcoming the traumatic experience and recognizing that I had been traumatized, and not to mention all of the things that are coming up with, if this is happening, right after you give birth, which for me it did. It happened, our relationship severed almost 6 months after I gave birth to my son. So I think you got to recognize that you need time to heal. and you need time to grieve from that relationship, or else you take your madness into the co-parenting relationship. And there's nothing wrong with putting the brakes on things, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we just broke up and these wounds are still fresh. I'm still hurting. And a lot of times our spouses or our former significant others don't necessarily have the emotional vocabulary to communicate what they're feeling. And so it stifles us from communicating what we feel. But I think a lot of times we don't recognize the leadership potential that we have as women, and recognizing that if we are vulnerable, if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, it opens up the doorways for more communication to happen. Because a lot of times I think, and as a woman who, I have a bunch of brothers, and I also have a male-centered household. I'm the only woman in my household. And one of the things that being in these types of male-centered environments has kind of forced me to understand is how sensitive men really are. They are really sensitive, and they are really a lot of times looking for us to open up the emotional airways to even have a conversation, because they really view us as, they're scared of us. Most men are scared of women. And they're not going to tell you that, but that's just the reality. They are afraid of you. They're afraid of what you think. The reality of how men perceive themselves is so wrapped up in how we as women perceive them that oftentimes they're not even going to approach you with how they feel, because they feel like you're going to rip them to shreds. So I think by allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and allowing ourselves the time that we need to grieve for that relationship and expressing, I am hurt, I am angry, and this is not a good time for me to make co-parenting decisions. It kind of opens up those emotional airwaves, and it sets precedent for him understanding that he has to respect the way that you feel, and that your emotions are important and need to be acknowledged. So I think that's one of the first steps, is really just, excuse me, I'm sweating a little bit, is just admitting that you're mad and admitting that you need time to grieve, because you can't make sound decisions. I wrote down that a mad mind does not make sound decisions. So when you are in your co-parenting, when you're in this co-parenting journey, you have to recognize that when your mind is hurt, when you are experiencing emotional anguish, when you are angry and pissed off, you cannot make sound decisions. This is not a good time for you to set the rules of how you want your co-parenting journey to go, because you're still emotional and raw, and that's okay. Like, you might need to sit in that. But by recognizing that you are engaged in, or that you are in a traumatic situation, it really allows you to sit back and reflect and not use that frantic emotional state as a baseline for your co-parenting relationship. Because if you start making decisions and start setting precedent from this place of emotional vulnerability, it's going to be really hard for you in the future to go back and rewind all those things that might happen. So I can remember a time in my co-parenting relationship where I really was angry. It took me years to get over my anger. And once in the midst of that, I would just lash out at my son's father sometimes, because I was so angry and hurt. And I didn't necessarily, because he was afraid to be emotionally transparent and I was afraid to be emotionally transparent, there wasn't space for me to say that I was feeling pain and that I needed space and time. And so I wasn't able to set that baseline until much later in the relationship. And it caused for my son to be in the middle of our mess, because he was doing the exact same thing I was doing. I don't know how hurt he was, but I know he was certainly lashing out on me as well. And so I think that you really just have to step back and sit in that. And also, in that time that you are taking to recognize the loss of your relationship, the loss of this relationship that you've had with your child's parent, you need to recognize the strengths and the positive outcomes of that relationship. So even if the relationship wasn't a super in-depth relationship, recognize why you were attracted to that person in the first place. What about that person made you want to have a child with them? Even if you regretted it the moment you got pregnant, what happened in the midst of that time that y'all spent together that made you want to have this experience with this person? Because at the end of the day, you didn't have to keep the baby. You kept the baby for a reason. What was the reason? And even if the reason has nothing to do with them, that is going to help you to see the silver lining of the situation. Even if your only reason is, that I just love my baby so much that I wanted to see that life come to fruition, you have to look at that silver lining as you are approaching making co-parenting decisions. So recognize the strengths of the relationship you had, because those strengths of the relationship that you had, if you were fortunate enough to have some type of longevity in your relationship with your co-parent, by looking at those strengths, it's also going to help you and assist you in analyzing and figuring out what the outcomes of the decisions that you make, and as well as the compromises that you ask your co-parent to engage in, are going to be. So you want to really recognize those strengths, and also think about the positive outcomes that you've had as a result of the relationship. And when you do this, when you take out the time to grieve the relationship you had with your co-parent, what it also allows you to do is to release your former partner from your possibly stifling definition of them. So one of the things you have to recognize as a socially mature person, as an emotionally mature person, is that nobody stays the same. People are entitled to change. People are entitled to decide they want to take a different path in their life. And your job as an emotionally and socially mature person is to allow people that flexibility in their lives and to release them from the definitions that you have created for them. And recognizing that just because you define somebody with a certain personality or a certain characteristic does not make it true. I read a quote in a book that I'm always thinking about, the book Self-Mastery by Robert Greene. I think it's Robert Greene. Don't give me the line. I know the book's called Self-Mastery, but I can't remember this man's name. But he also wrote the 48 Laws of Power. But one of the things he says in the book is that an emotionally mature person allows people to earn their position in their life on a rolling basis, depending upon how that person, the flexibility almost of that person's persona and lifestyle. So you have to recognize that just as this co-parenting shift is going to bring about a big change in your persona, it is also going to bring about a big change in your former spouse's persona. And that may be for the good and it may be for the bad. But you have to release them from the definition that you had for them. Which means, let's say your definition of your co-parent is somebody who is not necessarily good with being with communication. That's your definition. Your job as the co-parent now is to find out, how does this person most effectively communicate? And if they don't communicate effectively, what can I put in place in order to be an effective communicator with this person? That may mean not talking to this person on the phone. That may mean only having phone conversations with them, because maybe there are oftentimes miscommunications via text message, and that's causing rifts in your relationship. Maybe you want to say, hey, can we talk about this on the phone? Or maybe you don't want to communicate with that person at all. Maybe the communication level has gotten so right that it's best that you have some type of intermediary. But you have to recognize that that person's allowed to change, and that they are allowed to begin to redefine themselves. And also, you have to operate in a spirit of supreme accountability. At the end of the day, the fact that your relationship ruptured is evidence that you cannot control him. And I'm going to say that again. You cannot control him. The only person you can control is you. So the first step in any co-parenting relationship, well, the second step I'll say after you're done being mad, is to be supremely accountable for your own actions, and to only allow accountability in your space, which means defining for yourself what it means to be a good parent for you, and also defining for your parent for your partner what accountability looks like for you, but allowing them the flexibility to define that on their own. And I'm just going to keep it 100 with some of y'all. Some of y'all are just given too many chances. The reality is you have to base your co-parenting relationship. You have to set a baseline. And the baseline needs to look starkly like, what are the necessities that are needed to raise this child? And when I say necessities, I do not, listen, we have to be realistic. And we cannot expect our former spouse to be our husband because he's gone. If he gone, he gone. Which means, what are the necessities of raising this child? They need clothes. They need shelter. They need to be happy and joyous in life. They may need to do some extracurricular activities. But he's not responsible for making you happy, sis. Which means just because you want to go out every night or every other night or every other weekend does not mean he should have to babysit. Now, if you have a regularly scheduled programming that says that he's supposed to get the baby every Friday night and he don't do it, well then, yeah, he got to be accountable for his actions. But if this is just what you want because it's what you want, no. That's just not reality. And you got to be realistic with yourself. So being realistic means I'm going to be accountable for me. Meaning if our child wants to be a swimmer and he wants to take swimming lessons, I'm going to do my best to get him there, and I'm going to do my best to be financially responsible. And you, as the co-parent, are going to be accountable in this space. Meaning if the kid wants to go swimming, then I'm going to pay for half and you going to pay for half. And if he can't be accountable, guess what? There ain't nobody who's not accountable is not allowed in this space. So if you can't be accountable, then the courts is going to make you accountable. It's real simple. But you got to stop arguing and fussing, because one thing I've learned living with boys is they do not listen to what you say. They listen to what you do. You can scream until you're blue in the face, but if your actions are contradictory to what you say, there's not going to be any progress made. And when you speak, I was listening to India Ari's song, Talk to Her. And it says, when you talk to her like you want somebody to talk to your mama. Same thing with your man. When you talk to him like you want somebody to talk to your papa. You got to talk to people the way you want to be talked to. If you're going to scream at him and yell at him, then you're going to get the same exact thing. Because whatever energy you put out there, that's karmic. You're getting it back. You are getting it back. So you have to be, even if you are the only one who is being civil in that relationship, you have to be that. Be the civilian, sis. Because at the end of the day, your child is going to see that, and they're going to honor you for it more later. You have to be that woman who is honorable, even when you are engaging with somebody who you know might be a narcissist, somebody who you know might be half damn crazy, somebody who you know may not be able to communicate. It is our job to be the bigger person. And no, this is not letting him off the hook. This is not driving your own damn self crazy, because that's what happens when you engage in these co-parenting relationships and the other parent is acting like a damn fool and you're following lead and acting like a damn fool. What happens when you get off the phone or when you get done engaging with them in person? You are exhausted. Don't exhaust yourself, sis. Simply be accountable for your own actions and only allow accountability to exist in your presence. And that doesn't mean accountability for the silly stuff. Don't fall into the trap of the silly stuff. And if the man is giving you stuff on a consistently basis, if he is consistently coming to pick up his kids, if he is consistently giving you money, and then 1 week he can't do it and you're going to be mad, that's you not being accountable for you. That is you not being accountable for you. Because like I said before, you have to allow this person the flexibility to be the person that they are now. It is not up to you to change them. It is not up to you to make them do what you need them to do. It is simply up to you to be accountable in your space and to live your life in a way that is honorable to not only yourself, but to your children and the type of woman you may want them to co-parent with in the future. So you need to think about that, especially if you have sons. That's one thing that I pray for all the time, is that I am a good model for my son, so that when they go out into the world, they will find women who are also good models for their families. So you need to think about that long and hard. If every time you talk to your baby's dad on the phone, y'all are arguing and you doing it in front of your kids, you need to know that that is what your child is going to replicate in a relationship in the future. And that's just what's real. That's just what's real. And also, lastly, I just wanted to really help everybody to understand, help us mamas to understand what these relationships are all about. And I wrote down, relationships are a reflection, or excuse me, what did I write down? Hold on, let me get back to my even in co-parenting, you are a symbol of your community's ability to create alliances. So oftentimes as Black women, we are always wondering why we are struggling with creating alliances with men. It is because we don't recognize that the way that we treat other people is a reflection of our communication habits, and it is evidence of the nature of how we respect ourselves. So how you are treating and how you are engaging in alliances, remember, these are relationships, but they are ultimately alliances that you are making with the opposite sex to engage in the rearing and raising of your children. So are you able in your life to replicate positive male-female alliances? If you aren't, then you need to look inside. And yes, I'll be the first to admit, there are all types of stumbling blocks to Black women finding good men. That's just what's real in our communities right now. But ultimately, we have to make sure that we aren't playing the blame game here, and that we are recognizing when we are the problem. And that doesn't mean taking on the problems that he's created, because Black men have created a whole ton of problems over there by themselves. They got a whole pile of poop sitting up over there with them. But we also, I always like to say, broken Black men equals broken Black women. And if we are both broken, then how is it that we are correctly able to define what a good Black man is anyway? And that's just recognizing where we sit on this planet right now, recognizing the environment where we sit at, recognizing our space in humanity right now. We are deeply flawed people. We have a lot of problems, but that does not mean that we cannot create successful alliances. And how we do that is by being accountable, by recognizing and self-reflection, understanding that you need to reflect before you call him on the phone. You need to ask yourself some questions. Why? Because most of us have went through our entire lives and we have not seen successful male-female alliances modeled for us. So having that understanding means being accountable for the fact that you may not be displaying, expressing, behaving, or thinking in a way that is conducive to creating successful male-female alliances. So if you got baby mama or baby daddy drama and you didn't listen to this from the beginning, you probably need to do so. So that is the end of the Brown Mama Monthly Message. I will be on again on August 14th with certified public accountant Holly Reed, the author of the Master Playbook. She is going to be talking about financial literacy for our communities and how we as African American women, the keepers of culture and community in our households, can begin to operate in a fiscally responsible manner. So I will see y'all next time. Like I said before, if you are tuning in from another state and you are interested in starting your own Brown Mamas chapter, we currently have one chapter here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we are definitely open to other African American moms coming forth and starting their own villages. Here in Pittsburgh, we are nearly 5,000 moms strong, and we want to help, or I want to help, other African American women to create the villages that they need in order to raise happy, healthy adults. I'm going to be placing the link in the comments. Make sure you check for that. And then also on Monday, we will be beginning a new challenge for mompreneurs. So I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on Monday. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see y'all later.